Hey, everybody. As recruiters, we all know that hiring can be one of the most challenging parts of running a business. Whether you're a startup looking to build a dream team or a well established company aiming to streamline your recruitment process, the right tools can make all the difference. Teamtailor is a powerful, all in one recruitment software your candidates and team will love. It's not just a piece of software, but a way of working. With Teamtailor, you get everything you need all in one place: powerful analytics, an AI assistant, customizable workflows, powerful integrations, and so much more. Plus, Teamtailor is easy to use and implement with their intuitive, user-friendly interface. 94% of their users report better team collaboration, and 97% see an increase in qualified candidates. If you're focused on the candidate experience, CX is at the heart of the ATS. Just ask any of the 4 million candidates who connect with customers every month. Join the ranks of over 150,000 recruiters and more than 8,500 companies like Oatly, Porsche, and OneFlow who have transformed their recruitment with Teamtailor. Discover the new way to attract and hire top talent and see the results for yourself. Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Rebel TA podcast. You're tuned in with Leah Knobler, VP of People at Help Scout. What's up, Leah?
Hey, Brandon. It's Friday. I'm ready to party with you.
Heck yeah. Thanks for coming on. I've been a big fan of yours as an internet lurker and just like second degree knowing folks, but your background is amazing. So I'm thrilled to have a conversation today.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Where are you based and what are you working on?
I am in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Moved here 2 years ago, so it still feels new to say. Before that, my wife and I were in Boston for over a decade. So very much an East Coaster, and that explains probably my sarcastic humor. I feel like that's maybe an East Coast thing. But yeah, what am I working on? It's Q4. We're sliding into the holidays, so it feels like a mad dash to the finish. But the team is plugging away on really great stuff. We're working on our 2025 planning and strategy. We're currently running a engagement survey for the company. I peeked at it, is trending up, which is exciting to me. And we have a lot of, we're hiring some key roles that we're hoping to get some offers out before end of year. So fun times.
That's awesome. I feel like the end of the year snuck up really quick. People always say that. But for me, I can't believe we're only like 7 weeks out for the end of the year. I know I'm sprinting. I've got a few recs that just dropped too. And it's like, okay, let's go. Like I got to build pipe now. Luckily, Thanksgiving's like a week later this year. So I've got sequences running. I'm an outbound recruiter. So yeah, when it comes to end of year, it's cool to juggle those cross-role types of initiatives. I know you and I have bonded over how recruiters have grown, and your background as a recruiter becoming a VP of People is fascinating to me because I think we need more folks like you. We need to see more CHROs that come from a recruiting track. I have opinions why, but I want to hear yours first.
Yeah. So obviously I'm biased, but I think recruiters learn to juggle so many things, competing priorities, communicating with stakeholders, knowing how to sell opportunities. And, I think a lot of those skills set you up for success to then lead the whole function. I don't know a single people leader that's not juggling multiple competing priorities and stakeholders and trying to communicate clearly and consistently to all of them. And you really learn that, I think, when you're a great recruiter. And you also have to really understand the company you work at and the business fundamentals and the culture to be able to sell it to other candidates. So, you become the face of the company. And I always think that the people team is the face of a company largely. We are the people who help create the culture and the programs and the policies that support it and make it a great place to work. So it seems like a no-brainer to me.
I agree. And I don't diminish the work that folks do in HR. I think HR in general from an org is evolving. We saw that in the movement to even just calling it people ops, and even recruiters moving to job titles that are more talent acquisition partner. When we think about some of the strategies to hiring, developing, and retaining employees, recruiters move at a very fast velocity. That's something I've observed. We're also kind of idiosyncratic and we're kind of out there.
What are you trying to say?
I love it. That's why I do this. Connecting and building community with recruiters has been a lot of fun for me in the last couple of years, particularly, especially since launching this pod. But one of the pieces that I think around recruiters becoming more strategic is just the way we operate with velocity and the relationships that are forged between a recruiter and a hiring manager through the shared OKR. When we collab with a hiring manager, it's to get a hire across the line. HRBPs, they do good work for the employee lifecycle, but there's something that happens in the codification of that relationship when you get to a yes. Any thoughts there?
No, I mean, just as you were explaining that, I was like, yes, that's a great, yes, you're articulating that beautifully. Yeah, the velocity piece really resonates. If anything, I've been told like a growing edge for me is to actually slow down a little bit, which is valid, but there's just something that feels good about accomplishing things. And certainly growing up as a recruiter, you learn to, I mean, I have a little flag right above my desk that says get shit done. So it's very much my ethos.
Heck yeah.
And, I think the best recruiters have that sense of urgency, right? You want to get to that finish line. You want to make a great hire. You want to, delight your hiring team, and you want to have a great experience for the candidate. And so it's built in, right? I think great recruiters, that's just kind of who we are. And I agree though, once you, I think, move into running the whole function, pumping the brakes a little bit here and there is great and important, and you got to bring everybody along with you. But yeah, there's always so much to do, especially if you're working at a startup. It's not moving at a glacial pace. So, I think those skills set you up well. Yeah.
That's a great tactical takeaway for recruiters who are evolving in their careers to be able to slow down. I know a lot of great recruiters, particularly in startups during zero interest rate policy, we were working insane rec loads. Like I remember working with a scale up and I was working like 15-hour days. I was sourcing candidates in the middle of the night. It was go, go, go. That's okay. Like if you want to sign up for that, that can be crucible in developing skills and relevancy to the market so that you can call on that experience. So I think about it as like career sprints. Like go give 18 or 20 months to a startup, have that experience, then go to a different role, maybe slow down a bit. The analogy that I think of for recruiters and people ops partners is like, what is it? A square is a rectangle, but a rectangle isn't a square? Or is it the opposite way? A square is a rectangle isn't a square. And that's the way I think of all of the wonderful counterparts that we have on the HR side. They're motivated by something different. Mm-hmm. And those are the folks that tend to lean out of recruiting versus the folks that are in recruiting that lean in to people management and people operations work. That's like one bucket of my role right now, but at heart, I'm a recruiter, and it's that velocity every day that motivates me. So it's cool to hear about your get shit done thing. I'll show you mine. This is my to-do list, and it's AE sourcing. I haven't touched this in like 8 months.
RevOps. Yep.
Because I'm always sourcing. There's like a difference between sourcing and pipelining. It's those daily motions. You've got to groom your outbound because good recruiters are able to capture serendipity. And so much of recruiting comes down to just timing.
Yes. Always be sourcing. That's our ABS version.
Keep it simple, sourcer.
We're too much.
So one of the things that really made a strong impression on me, Leah, is the work that you've done from a systems and the commitment to candidate experience and amplifying an employer brand at Help Scout. Do you want to talk a little bit tactically just about your rec ops workflow and some of the plays that you've deployed?
Yeah. So I think it's helpful to give a little bit more context. I didn't study recruiting. I don't think most people go to school to be recruiters. But I studied psychology, and then I was a high school teacher out of the gate. And a lot of translatable skills, I think, and shout out to high school teachers everywhere. Totally a thankless job. But when I joined Help Scout, I was, sort of a people generalist and our office manager. We did at the time have a small Boston location. And very quickly watching, first of all, hiring in a remote company back in 2015, that was already just a unique experience. I remember my parents were like, how do you hire people you've never met in person? And I was like, pretty easily, actually. But all to say is I've always been self-taught. I just have that, I think, innate love of building relationships. And I was so excited about Help Scout that it felt so easy to sell it to other people. And I really believe then and still do what we're building and how we're doing it, that it kind of just, it flowed really naturally. Like writing outreach to candidates, I was just being me, being authentic about how great it is to work here and what we're doing. And I think people really felt that and it worked. And, I was just able to, I think, create the recruiting function and we started sourcing to hire numerous candidates that way and really helped diversify our engineering team, specifically reaching out to like wonderful women engineers on LinkedIn. Yeah. So from there, I think what we started doing several years ago that still feels, I haven't heard a lot of companies if they do this, but after we make a hire, the recruiter collaborates with the hiring manager to write what we just call hiring summaries. And it walks through, it shares, in the end, the funnel data, time to hire, time to fill, a lot of the key metrics we track, as well as some demographic percents, how many women made it to our last stage, how many underrepresented groups made it to that stage. So we're just sharing, we're compiling all this data, we're sharing it. And then we include, what was the process? What were we looking for? And then ultimately, why did we hire who we hired? And it's this really nice write-up. And every time we share them in Slack with the entire company, all these emojis flood because it's also a great way, I think, to introduce the new hire before they start.
For sure.
But it's just this, I think, really honest transparency of the process that over time has also helped, I think, hiring teams feel really accountable for the work, knowing that ultimately we have to share the receipts to the entire company. And yeah, it's kind of been a really special thing. And also other teams do this, right? Like engineers and do retros. Like that's a normal practice. So we kind of were like, why don't we do that here? Yeah. So I think that's something other companies should start doing, or at least recruiters can start suggesting, but just share your work with other people. And I think it just builds trust in the recruiter and the work you're doing. And people start to, I think, really feel in awe of the TA function. And yeah, show your receipts, show your worth.
Heck yeah. Debriefs, postmortems, sharing why something didn't work, transparency around the pipeline. Like I spin up dashboards. I know we're using the same ATS. I'll pin them to a hiring manager's home screen. I'll throw them into a custom Slack channel for a hire on a Friday afternoon. Like I want them to know my input to get the output that we're sharing that outcome on. I think there's a lot of talk about like quality of hire, which is like a complex concept. We could talk about that, but it's this idea of commitment to the hiring process and that employee that we offer that goes back to this idea of needing more folks in people leadership from recruiting so that it doesn't just have this like handoff and stop at the signed offer letter and start date.
Yeah. And I think also what's so great is, recruiters are so responsible for attracting the talent, getting them here. I think sometimes it feels you want to be like, I hope they're having a great experience now. I hope all the things I said and promised are actually coming true. And so, now being, in charge of the people function, I feel like I'm able to make sure that experience is happening and that we are selling, an authentic offer to people. And if not, I get to also help try to make it better. So that feels really special.
When I think about post-hire outcomes and tying in some of the attributes of top performers, that to me, tied to the interview plan, is really how HR can be more strategic. And this is a people analytics thesis that a lot of companies and vendors are trying to build. And this is kind of back to like skills-based hiring. What are the most important skills we're assessing? When I think about those competencies and attributes we create interview questions around, one of the challenges is there's no universal definition, and the competency bank of things we can look for is like tens of thousands. So it's really identifying through those relationships we forge with top performers for how we can find folks that share those hard and soft skills, but also think about the role of divergence in teams and what are some of those complementary skill sets. Visually, I think about this as like a color wheel. If we've got somebody like, maroon, well, what's like a complementary color to maroon from a skills perspective? So maybe I've had too much philosophical coffee this morning, but how do you think about skills-based hiring, competencies, and that analogy?
Yeah, I mean, I love it. And it's funny when when we're mentioning skills-based hiring, I'm like, isn't that what we've always been doing? Like, what other way is there? Like I don't hire
Amen.
you based on how you look or, that you like a certain football team. So, I think I'm also a person, I typically hate buzzwords, and anytime something becomes a trend, I kind of roll my eyes a little bit. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just feel like if you are trying to hire great people, the recruiter and the hiring manager should be meeting and discussing, what has been successful so far on this team? Like, what are the skills, like you said, from our best performers? And then, like, also identifying, like, what are the gaps? What does the team need more of? And you have that list together, and then you design your interview process around that and making sure you're asking questions that solicit that data. And then hopefully, ultimately, you make a great hire. I will say, what's something that's been top of mind lately for me is, I don't know if you remember recently, there was a big whole thing about Brian Chesky and founder mode and getting
Oh,
back to
yeah.
founder mode. And founders being in the weeds and all this stuff. And so I initially I read that and I kind of was like, oh yeah, and very much shout out Nick Francis, our CEO and co-founder at Help Scout, is very much a founder who is in the weeds and like product visionary, but also rolls up his sleeve and writes copy, and I think that's part of what, at this point makes him actually really great. And for a long time, so I'll also say is what I found in this movement that I highly recommend is someone named Molly Graham. She wrote a post kind of in response to this, and she's had a hugely successful career, worked for Mark Zuckerberg. Like a lot of the founders now that are, whether you like them or not, have been, hugely successful. And she kind of boiled it down to that, the job of an excellent operator is to teach the company to act like the founder at scale. That's her line. And how I've really internalized this is I was like, right, I think some of our best hires here know how to work with Nick and then also scale Nick, if that makes sense. And it's kind of been an unlock, I think, to being successful in our hires. So there was like, I think, a handful of years where we were like, okay, if we just find this person, then Nick can, remove himself and then that person can do it. And I think when you hire based like that, you're setting that person up not for success because, I just think you're not being genuine in like what it's like to work at this company. And I think, so also say is now when we go out and we're hiring engineers and product designers and product managers, we talk about, hey, are you comfortable working closely with the CEO or working closely with our other two co-founders? And we never used to ask that. And it's just like, what, of course we should ask that. Like we're looking for skills in people that can amplify that. If you come in and you're like, oh, I don't want to be, that feels like micromanaging, or like, why is the CEO looking at my, designs? Help Scout's not the place for you. And that's okay, right? I think there's this illusion that you should be able to hire everyone and everyone can feel successful at your company. And I don't think that's true, right? So basically that was a long way of saying, I think that that's been Molly Graham's blog post, I think was really insightful. And like thinking about, especially because it's recruiters get to kind of own this and help execute on this, is like understanding your leadership and what skills amplify the leaders at your company. And like, that's, I think, how you also can make really great hires.
I think that's really insightful. And it also alludes to just like the importance of absorbing information and being a curious reader. That's how we develop critical thinking skills. I don't think people read a lot of mid and long form content, but the great recruiters I know are the folks that are subscribed to the newsletters. They're having conversations. One of the things that has blown me away about recruiting and solidified my commitment to this as a profession, having tried some other things, is the generosity and spirit of the people who do the work. During zero interest rate policy, if you're working in startups, like post-pandemic, I didn't have time to network. And during the pandemic, the conferences shut down. I've been recruiting going into year 10. This will be year 10. And the majority of my experience and skills became relevant in the market during those timeframes where it just looked different. And now teams don't have these big budgets to send their recruiters to conferences the way they did perhaps in the 2000s. So I think the way we evolve community has changed. And one of the ways I did that for me is just like engaging with influencers' content, sending emails to folks who were writing, asking them questions, taking interest in their work. And now I've got like folks in my DMs that send me, Vine style videos and jokes and call me to talk about things uh, because of putting myself out there
Mm.
and validating theses, asking questions, asking for input. Who are some of the mentors and how do you think about mentorship and giving back as you grow in your influence that you're having on our community?
Yeah, great question. I actually just recently I posted a little thank you gratitude post on LinkedIn to folks who over time I feel like I have collected and asked to be in my board of advisors group, my personal board of advisors. But it's funny. I remember so much in growing up and in college. I'm very lucky. My mom has always been a very big influence on me, and she tried to find people in her network to like set me up with for like informational chats. And I hated them. I felt so awkward and uncomfortable. And also I was, 19, 20. What did I know? But I think it subconsciously implanted in my brain because as I got older, it just, and especially once I started my career at Help Scout, I was doing so much stuff for the first time that I'd never done before. And, I'm a competitive person. I grew up playing sports. I really like to be good at things I do. And so to be able to do that, you have to learn and you have to ask people who do it well. And so I really, started putting myself out there to reach out to people to be like, hey, I love what you're saying on, LinkedIn, and it looks like you've done this. Can we just chat? And I was very lucky that, people said yes to that. And I had intros from other folks. And, over time, you develop this bench of people who also become friends that you can just reach out to anytime you have questions. And I can't imagine getting to become VP of people at this point without having those folks. And so, yeah, you just have to kind of get over the awkwardness of it and feeling self-doubt and, just put yourself out there because I think we forget that everyone else are also people looking for connection and might need help or you might have something to offer them too. And who doesn't love, getting outreach from someone who's like complimenting you? Like that always goes really far in my book, at least. So, it's worthwhile for you and whoever you're trying to learn from.
You heard it here first, folks, straight from Leah's mouth. Butter those recruiters up. We've been put through the ringer. We are not in an ivory tower. There is no prestige here. I literally don't know a single recruiter who was not impacted or displaced through layoffs in the last few years, beginning with COVID. And I think that's something candidates, particularly online, tend to not fully grasp. We are also not the decision makers on hires. We enable a process and we service our internal clients and stakeholders. We can influence that for sure. But at the end of the day, like we're just a piece in the puzzle. But recruiters get dragged. One of the things that makes us resilient, I think, to that dynamic is the fact that we've always been scapegoated internally. So we have like this big empath enthusiasm to help and serve others, but we also have this like big coat of armor we put on because like we've always been taking punches, often from challenging hiring managers or when teams point the finger at recruiting for being the problem. So we're in an interesting position to bridge that gap of empathy. And my advice is like, be a bridge, not a boulder. And how can you help people and give back? One of the tactical takeaways I have for giving back to the community and thinking about networking is spend a third of your time with your peers, spend a third of your time learning from folks that are 10, 15, 20, 40 years, shout out to Jerry Crispin, ahead of you, and a third of your time giving back and passing the torch. Because at the end of the day, for me, recruiting was like an on-ramp to financial security and a profession. Like I spent my 20s having life experiences, followed my passion after the Great Recession, started my first job out of college driving a forklift. Like recruiting for me is a blast. I got my nice indoor job. I'm wearing my slippers. How do you think about this idea of applying lived experience to the actual work we do? And does that have any weight or influence on converting human behavior when it comes to offering roles?
Whew, yes. Yeah, I mean, we are, but a culmination of our lived experiences. So yeah, that's going to impact where we are today. Excuse me. So yeah, I think I just agree. I was nodding my head a lot. I very much in my 20s, even though I was a teacher and in education, I felt very much also soul searching and still asking like, who am I? But luckily, I'm sure you could draw the line on how being a forklift operator has set you up to be a great recruiter. I'd like to hear it actually.
um, I I was also operating a saw, like as a sawyer, and I have all my fingers. So
Listen,
somehow
and that's impressive. You attention to detail.
now I can type fast and crank on outbound volume for my sourcing sequences. No,
It's all related.
I want to double click on that. The teaching is an interesting piece. How do you think about applying what you learned as an educator to mentoring and coaching managers or potentially even your direct reports? I know you have an
Mm.
open tech recruiter role.
I do. Yes. Yeah. Nothing actually really prepares you for teaching, I think, other than just do it. You get kind of thrown into it and you start. And what an experience to stand in front of a room of like 42 young people ready to just like either not listen to you or, desperately wanting to listen to you, judging you, all the things like trial by fire. And you eventually you either are successful at teaching or you're not. And I think I was decent. Did it for about 4 years before deciding I don't actually think I want to do this forever. It's again, as I said, it's a lot, it's exhausting, but it teaching, you essentially have 40 stakeholders sitting before you, and one size fits all does not work to everyone. We're all unique, wonderful snowflake humans, and you can't just expect I'm going to go up there and teach something one way and everyone's going to learn it. And I think the same applies to when you manage a diverse team. My style with one person might not be what works with another. And you just have to learn to be really, flexible and intuitive and, have some emotional intelligence to know where to meet people. I think, the best managers have a lot of emotional intelligence that way. So yeah, again, teaching is, I think, a wonderful first step for all sorts of careers, but certainly for people management.
What subject did you teach?
US history and English to 11th graders.
Right on. Um, the high school I went to, actually, I took a hybrid. It was language arts and history together in like a block schedule.
Yeah. They
I don't
love
know
doing
if,
that.
yeah,
I didn't do it that way, but I've seen that model.
it was super fun. I remember like the professors I had, like having two folks. It was almost like they were doing like Stephen Colbert and Jon Stewart bits in class,
Yes.
and it was super entertaining. And I think it like solidified the idea to me that you can be your authentic self and have fun and like be fun with your team at work and
Yeah.
also be professional. And that to me is like a hallmark of recruiting, because you got to hype yourself up every day to work recs. You got to have your pitch down for candidates. You have to really listen. And I think that's a key to recruiting is like, yeah, we talk a lot. I'm a lifelong extrovert, but we also have to listen deeply and apply those pattern matching behaviors and be able to pick up on the motivations of candidates as they communicate with us in the funnel, and being able to feed that to our hiring managers so we know when to probe and when to sell. Because you've probably been in those interviews where you're like halfway through and you're like, yep, okay, I need to flip the switch and start selling
Yes.
this candidate. Or it's like, ooh, those assumptions that we made going into this, we really need to dive deeper. Here's a curveball and a kind of a hot take. Are interviews really just an exercise in confirmation bias?
It's possible. I mean, that's the thing that's so hard about hiring, and I say it all the time, is it's an art mixed with a science. It's never going to be one or the other, because it's a bunch of humans who are prone to error and fallacies trying to make good decisions about other humans. What could go wrong? So it's a good question.
There's no right
And
answer.
yeah, I just think we do what we can, I think, to give everyone their best shot, and to just, as you're talking to people, make sure you're sort of checking yourself and your biases and go from there. And then I think that's the value of a great interview process, is they're not just talking to you, they're talking to a lot of people, and you're trying to mitigate bias along the way and really keep it to, their skills and their experience and potential. But yeah, it's tough.
One of the trends I've been seeing, and you've probably seen this too, is There's like probably 6 or 7 hot topics from a content perspective around recruiting that just blow up. And it's a culture war, both sides. It's like recruiters and companies versus candidates. And the Reddit anti-work mob has officially moved in to LinkedIn.
Great.
There's this idea of like the right number of interviews in a loop. I actually think it's something where you want to find the right balance of assessment interviews and sell interviews and conversations. Historically, before the high prevalence of remote working, you would have your like mid funnel and finalist candidates on site. They would meet a bunch of folks. They would meet somebody at the front desk. They would see the office. They would get a feel for the physical culture of what it's like to go to work. They would see smiles. They would see handshakes. There's all these little influential pieces of the puzzle that no longer exist in remote hiring. So I push back on like these fast-paced interview loops. Like, just communicate with your candidates at a personalized level. Like, how many conversations do you want to have with peers that are non-interviews? What do you need to feel good about this value proposition? Taking these things that don't scale and applying them to our startup recruitment funnels is critical for getting a great post-hire outcome, in my opinion. What do you think is a good interview loop, and how do you balance that hiring for a remote company?
Yeah, great questions. I say, typically average about 4 interviews and a take-home project. Every single role we hire for has some sort of project, whether it's sort of a presentation of previous work, or creating something new, co-creating something with people on the team. We try to, whatever it is, ground it in something really relevant and applicable so that the candidate also gets a flavor for what they'd be doing. Like, hello, everyone wants to, try before they buy a little bit. So yeah, I'd say around 4 in a project. But what we've actually started doing lately, and you were, the lights were going off in my head as you were speaking, is when we've gotten to candidates towards the end and we're like really excited about them, we used to finish the process, do references, and like give them an offer. And now we're also like, hey, open up the curtain even more. Is there anyone else you want to talk to? And, like, it's an engineering role, but would you like to talk to our CFO, or, just cross team, like just anyone who's, I think, really great at, for one, selling the company, who's also just like excited to be at Help Scout. Like, yeah, let's offer up chats. There's no limit, like, especially if it helps that candidate make the decision and get excited about us, so I like flexibility. I like being able to be nimble and agile, and not just being, just because we do it this way, it has to be this way. So being flexible, I think, is also an important trait for a recruiter.
Yeah, 100%. Double click on that. Flexibility, high EQ, you mentioned it earlier, scrappy, working at a high velocity. One of the other questions I ask, like, once we start to get that mutual signal that we're going to get to a handshake and this is our candidate, if it is a leadership role within the company, one of the things to ask is like how they would go about building a team. And the best signal you can get, particularly in an exec hire, is not a plan, but names. If you ask them how they're going to get something done, if they don't say the names of people, that's a huge signal they're not the right person. Just like asking for referrals when a candidate rejects an outbound sourcing message, always follow it up with like, okay, cool. Like, is there anybody else that you think I should talk to? We're keeping a tight search on this. Asking those folks when you're trying to close them, like, who else do you want to bring along? Let me show you my headcount plan. This is how I'm thinking about building the org next year. Like, how do you want to partner with me so that we can get the right folks in seat? We're looking to maximize budget. And if you've got like 2 or 3 outlier folks that are really like 3x engineers, there's no such thing as a 10x engineer. If you've got a 3x engineer, how do we get them with you? When do you think we should start talking about joining? Do you think you need to onboard for 30, 60, 90 days and get more information about the role before we start recruiting? That's how you codify the relationship and build trust as a recruiter to then be that strategic partner from a people perspective when you're working in a lean team.
Yeah. Some of my favorite hiring managers are ones that are always like proactively thinking about their teams and like who they want on their teams. Like, I often feel like I wasn't never into like, trading cards when I was little, but I imagine, people who are really into that are like, all right, I need this card and I need that one. And this person's like rookie card. Like, you're just always thinking about who do you want around you. And you're out there trying to find those people and hold on to them. Like if I were to go somewhere else and start over and build a people team, yeah, you better believe I have a list of people I'd want to convince to come with me on day 5. Um, but at the same time, from a DEI lens and perspective, I sometimes bringing along the same people, I think doesn't give opportunity to others and to diversify teams. So I think it's worth being mindful, I think, about just hiring someone and then letting them just bring their whole people with them. So, again, flexible. Sometimes, just being mindful and intentional about what you're doing, I think leads to good outcomes.
For sure. I've noticed that too with a lot of recruiters who have been displaced, people that are friends, they're getting new roles, they're bringing their teams with them. It's great when you already have known entities and relationships to move really quickly. I think there is value in bringing people that you've worked with in the past. And it's awesome to see recruiters getting huge roles at massive tech companies, whether they're huge valuations or potential from a startup side or even in big tech, to see some folks getting those jobs through the referrals. But whenever I see those announcements, I'm like, oh, y'all work together like 3 times now? Like, who are the other 600
Snooze.
recruiters in the rack?
Yeah.
But
it's hard. Yeah, I just feel like we're in a time, especially right now with the macroeconomic climate, what it is still, everyone's trying to mitigate risk, right?
Yeah,
we all want
for
sure things. And it's hard to, turn away if someone's like, I've worked with this person, I know they're great, versus like, let's take a chance on a cold applicant. That's a tough one.
It's definitely a balance. You talked about in the pre-show that you posted your recruiter role. I know I sent you a name of somebody that's a good buddy. And when it comes to the volume of applicants right now for the recruiting market, what are you seeing? How are you thinking about recruiter hiring?
I anticipated there'd be some volume, but I posted yesterday on LinkedIn. I looked at it this morning. It's at 30,000 impressions.
Wow.
And that's not my usual. I wish it was, but no, that's probably twice, maybe 3 times what I usually get. And then in one day we have 500 applicants. 500. Dang. I remember there's been a time, for certain roles where we had like 500 applicants total. So it tells me it's still a tough time. I think a lot of companies are hedging and just doing contract recruiters right now. And so finding like the full-time in-house gigs are like, people are pouncing.
What advice do you have for a recruiter that might be out of work? How do they stand out in a stack of 500 when you're optimizing a 1 to 2% inbound yield ratio, in addition to probably 24 referrals from folks that hit you up with intros like I did?
Yep. I mean, you have to really nail the application. So whatever questions they ask or, whatever else you need to submit, sweat those details and put your best foot forward, really understand what they're looking for in the job description, and then connect it to like how you've done that and what you love about doing all those things. And I think as much as you can differentiate, especially if you're just, cold applying, create a loom, make a video, bring it to life in a different way. Like I'm just, seeing so many just written things. So, if someone sends me something in a different format that catches my eye and like makes it actually easier for me to understand who you are and what your value that you could bring is, like, yeah, I pay attention to that stuff. Not saying everyone needs now to send me videos or anything, but just I think when you can show that you're creative and you have the skills and experience, that's a win-win to get noticed, in my opinion.
Yeah, I saw a post this week that a Series B startup, like first talent hire, got hired because they stood out in the process by taking a look at the existing employee base and doing some like pattern matching and analysis of the talent profiles of who was in seat and how they brought that into their like talent sourcing, talent persona pitch for kicking off roles based on open recs on the careers page. Like that's the type of stuff that sets people apart. There's also a lot of hot takes when it comes to like free work. And this is one of those misunderstood pieces of the candidate journey that I have empathy for. Like a lot of folks are disgruntled, they've been out of work, they're disenfranchised with what it means to work. But I'm an optimist. I'm a candidate pool half full kind of guy. And I love to see folks that still have that shine in their eye, that optimism, that passion, especially in startups. Like if you don't have resilience and that enthusiasm and like know that your odds are stacked against you, like you're not good for startups. Like, sorry, like people want to work in startups because they have great comp, they have great potential, they have cool culture. We're super privileged, but at the end of the day, like we know what we're up against and we have this appetite for risk, and like the odds are we are going to fail. So like to me, it's like table stakes just to be able to wrap your arms around that concept and lean into not free work, but how you add value to a founder. The value add you mentioned is the work projects, work assessments, work simulations, whatever you want to call them. Operationalizing the job in the interview assessment process is the best way to understand if there's going to be a mutual fit. I think historically, those referrals and references have been the highest signal hiring teams look for, but it doesn't take into consideration the candidate so much. So these work assignments, work simulations, if you can give the candidate a taste of what it's like to actually work and collab, get into the systems and work, that's going to actually allow them to lean in or lean out of the process. And we can't forget to position the candidate in all of this.
Yeah. And not to mention, pay people for the projects. That's what we do. It's not like an enormous amount, but it's a token of gratitude that, hey, we're asking you to like put something together. Here's a stipend or a thank you. Like we do that for everything. And I think that goes a long way too.
That's sick. I remember talking about this with a couple of folks like a year or two ago. How do you operationalize that? Is it just like an invoice? Do you have to have them set up as a contractor? Are they payroll? It gets kind of murky.
I believe we use Pilot still for this, and it's something where like we can send them, they fill out a couple things and then we can just send them money through this as a one-off. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, you just pay them in crypto.
Yeah, exactly. 0.0005 of a Bitcoin.
I think that's good advice for recruiters. Like, do the work, find companies that align from your values. If you get a bad vibe from a company, like don't move forward in the process. Like, you both want to get great signal, and it's okay for a job not to be the right fit. And I think that's something that we're seeing in this scarcity and drying up of recruiter roles is folks are jumping on these roles that actually aren't a good fit. And we're going to see an issue in 2025 and 2026 on the L&D and performance management side as a result of the underemployment that we're seeing, where we've got VPs taking manager roles, we've got directors taking IC roles. But then you have recruiters who have persevered through these layoffs, and all of a sudden you've got like two ICs that have a very different experience level and talent persona and talent profile. How do you balance and reckon leveling and compensation? So seeing around a corner, like HR folks, I hope you're paying attention, because 2026 for merit increases, performance management is going to be nuts. You got to get those levels down packed and make sure you have a more rapid performance review cycle than just that annual review.
Yeah. And I think what you just said actually circles back nicely to why I think people who grow up from recruiting and become the whole people function leaders, recruiters know the importance of having career leveling and frameworks and having that all built out, because it helps you when you're hiring to be like, okay, what level, like what kind of engineer are we looking for? We're not just pulling things out of a hat, and sets you up for success down the road for sure.
Yeah. And if anybody needs social proof on this hot take and prediction as why recruiters are going to leapfrog their HRBP counterparts, do this. Go to your top performing engineer, ask them to tell you their HRBP's name, then ask them to tell you about their recruiter.
Interesting. I will say that that's probably often true, but I would be remiss if I don't say that the two people business partners we have here are out of this world. And our engineers absolutely know Allison's name and say it. So, and Mary, the recruiter. So, we're exceptions here, but that's a hot take, Brandon.
That's spicy. I love my HRBP counterparts and my folks that lean out of recruiting and lean into the L&D world. It's just a spicy one. One of the things I wanted to call out quickly before we wrap up is something you talked about, is like women in engineering, supporting historically marginalized, underrepresented groups, particularly in technology. I saw a statistic that in like 10 years, we went from like 22% women identifying, or individuals identified as women in tech, to like 22.6 in 10 years, basis point growth. What's wrong with tech? How do we get more women in tech? What are the talent communities you invest in?
Hearing that stat doesn't surprise me because I feel like has been reflected actually in our demographics here in our engineering work. I think, when I started in 2015, 16, putting all the efforts into recruiting and being really targeted in our sourcing, we did get to a place where our engineering team got to about close to, I want to say 60-40. And then I think since pandemic, it's kind of been a slow undoing, and for a lot of reasons. I don't think it's possible to pinpoint things, but I just think still coming out of COVID times, I've seen data that just shows that impacted women much harder than men, and trying to juggle kids at home and trying to do that schooling and Zoom school and juggle all the things. I think that burden still disproportionately impacts women. So I would imagine that's like one piece to that puzzle, but certainly not all of it. Yeah, and so we're currently trying to solve it again, right? And to put intentionality and effort into it. And yeah, I think it just starts with being transparent about it. And while we have engineering roles open now, trying our best to make sure that in the process, women candidates aren't just speaking to a whole panel of men, and trying to be intentional there. And we have a women and ERG internally, where folks, women can come and find support. And then just being really targeted. I think we have to still source and build diverse pipelines at the outset, because if we just post an engineering job and do nothing, like 99% of the applicant pool is going to be men. So if you just are doing hands off trying to hire women engineers, it's not going to work.
I'll just call out too, if you post an engineering job and 99% of them are men, 99% of them are also not going to pass through. Like the
Right.
just volume and yield ratios for inbound applications is optimizing for like 1 to 2%. Quick shout out to communities that really shaped the way I think about supporting women in engineering. Lesbians Who Tech, an amazing conference. And then Alpha. Alpha, I don't know how to say her last name, but it's Kadrin. She worked at Y Combinator as an early product engineer. She built the Alpha community. So those are two places I'll link up in the show notes. But anything else that you invest in that comes to mind where you're like, oh, you got to hang out with these folks?
I mean, you listed two really good ones. I have been to the Lesbians Who Tech conference before, and it was pretty epic. Yeah, I mean, early days, I guess, so we used Power to Fly. It was a great community. And what was that other one in New York that started? Now you can edit this part out.
Yeah, no worries. There's another one. Oh, there it is. It's called Key Values. It's not exclusively to women. But you know that
Key
one?
Values. Yes, I've had conversations with them in the past, but it's hard. Like, I think it's great to invest in these groups, and I have found personally, I think, more success just actually doing the work yourself and reaching out and connecting.
Yeah. I want to support people financially, and like job boards, recruiting communities. Like, yes, let me write you a $1,500 check. Let me get you $2,000. Let's sponsor a hackathon. We'll do a booth. But at the end of the day, too, it's about the authentic relationships you have. So it's like, yeah, I'll write you a check, but I'm also going to actually show up and shake your hand and ask you for 10 people who I need to talk to who really align with the values I'm representing. That's the name of the game. I want to get you out of here on time. Leah, thank you so much for joining on the Rebel TA podcast today. How can people stay in touch with where you are and what you're doing?
Yeah, LinkedIn's probably a great way. So yeah, always looking to connect with like-minded, wonderful talent nerds.
Nerds unite.
Yeah. Thanks, Brandon.